Seating arrangements, perhaps? Coach Massi here from M2 Speed, Strength, and Performance with another episode of Move Your Feet. This is actually the basics of ground reaction forces for training, episode number 4. Throughout the series, we've been reinforcing the fact that force is required for motion. In the last episode, we actually got up to the concept of creating, borrowing, and lending force. And I really encourage you to go back to episode 3 and see how we touch upon that. From here on out, it will be a bit of a recurring theme, creating your own human force to borrow the reactionary or ground reaction force to then lend it to your very next movement. Create, borrow, lend. It's a very important concept, and we really like to talk about it because it's very easily translatable or easy to translate to your athletes and clients by just saying, hey, look, you have your human force, your human energy that is going to be put into the ground. You're creating the ground reaction forces, getting them back, you're borrowing them, then you're lending them to the next movement. Gaining of some ground, moving laterally, whatever it is, you're going to find ground reaction forces, creating, borrowing, and lending, and you're going to find that throughout that entire concept. So we'll keep addressing that moving forward. But for today, we just wanted to address, it's a two-part question we pulled from a bunch of questions and emails that we got, and this is a really good inquiry that we wanted to take a few minutes to address. So it basically said, dear Coaches Massi, do we have to be in contact with the ground to produce force? And do ground reaction forces only exist in the ground or in the wall too? Really nice two-part question. So I'm going to bring Coach Matt in right now to attempt to simplify this. And by the way, that was from Amanda Secor from Quebec, Canada. So thank you, Amanda. Always put what facility you're from, but perhaps she's a lone trainer, so we appreciate your time. So, part of the question, or the first part of the question, do we have to be in contact with the ground to produce force? Well, in essence, since we play and live in contact with the ground, that would be ideal. So we would say we should probably be in contact with the ground. But to use or create our own human force, we could technically be hanging Matty in a swing, and I could ask him to throw me the medicine ball. He would be able to produce force, but in the swing, he probably wouldn't get the gusto or the degree or the maximal force required by just being suspended in air. And a couple of ways you can demonstrate the value of the ground to your client is by giving them a couple of different seating platforms. And you could do this in standing ways also by putting people up on maybe a Bosu ball or some unstable platforms. But we feel this is the easiest way to give them an example of why being in contact with the ground when you create your own force will elicit better ground reaction forces. So we don't have a swing to suspend Matty from, so the next best thing would kind of be if I had Matt sit on his ball facing me, and back up a little bit so you don't knock me to kingdom come, and watch that post right there. So if I said to Matty, get your feet off the ground, balance and push, balance, push, you see he's going to fall, right? So that probably wasn't the maximal amount of force he could give me because he wasn't in contact with the ground with his feet. Yes, in essence, the ball is in contact with the ground, but your feet give you the stability to generate more force. Now, Matty, easy. Your feet are on the ground now, just blast that ball out. Obviously, much easier for him to create force. Perfect. Let's get the ball out of the way. And another way we like to do this, and I'm going to actually say that my compadre Greg Rose had mentioned this, we've been using stools for a long time to address vertical forces and find out how people could push off for various kinds of movement. And Greg had mentioned it in Chicago, and kudos to him. But we also use the stool for the same exact simple example, a demonstration, to let people know what it is to be in contact with the ground theoretically, meaning if Matt takes his feet up off the stool, He's technically in contact with the ground, and don't go too hard because you can fall back, but Matt, blast me. Not bad. Strong guy, a lot of power, a lot of force. Now Matt really is in contact with the ground, with both feet on the ground. Matt, try to just blow it up at the wall. Much easier, right? So look, that's a demonstration. All we're trying to demonstrate is that because we live and play in contact with the ground, whether 1 feet or 2, and you can use that variable, 1 foot up, 1 foot down, on an unstable surface, etc., it gives the client or athlete a really good idea of, I understand what it is to channel that, use my own human energy, and channel up the ground reaction forces. So that was hopefully a pretty good response to part number 1 of that question. Part number 2 was, do ground reaction forces only exist in the ground? In other words, is it only coming back up at you from the ground, or in the wall too? So I don't know if you would call them wall reaction forces, but certainly there are reaction forces. Now, by virtue of the fact that the wall intersects with the ground, could you call them ground reaction forces? I guess. We'll call them surface reaction forces, because the same could be said for the post. The post is in contact with the ground. It's going to give a reaction force when you give your own force to it. Now, if this was a curtain or one of those big long vinyls like gym dividers that was just sort of hanging, suspended, it was soft, or it was a net, if you threw a ball into it, it's just going to decelerate the ball and it's going to slide down. By virtue of the fact that the wall intersects and is in contact with the ground, then you're going to get a surface reaction force. And it doesn't just have to be in contact with the ground and the ceiling. A lot of parks and playgrounds have walls out there, and the surface reaction forces we get off that wall come from the fact and virtue that it is in contact with the ground. So however people want to categorize that, you can call it surface reaction forces, you can call it ground reaction forces, whatever you may want to say, but simple, stupid simple illustration for your athletes and clients is, Matt, throw the ball at the wall, regular hip hinge, explosive push. Why does the ball come back? Well, because you're getting surface reaction force. Otherwise, if there was no reaction force here, it would just slide down the wall, sort of like when we talked about the squish balls, a different type of translation of force. And we're going to get into that within the next couple of episodes, how force gets translated and dissipated. So we just wanted to take a really short time to address this question, set it up for what I believe we have at least 3 or 4 more episodes, and kind of come to some sort of conclusion around those questions. So now that we addressed that question, in the next episode we're going to spend a little time concentrating on the convergence and intersection of the points of ground reaction force, where you find the vertical forces, horizontal forces, some of the axial forces, and how to find the timing to capitalize on the create, borrow, and lend concepts to actually utilize and reappropriate those forces in the direction that you want to. Once again, Coach Massi here from M2 Speed, Strength, and Performance. Greatness is forged, not fabricated. That's your day.